Britain learned early that power begins inside the human mind. Armies conquer land, but stories conquer entire nations far more easily. Persuasion bends reality, shapes truth, and engineers obedience without visible force. London mastered this long before the world understood psychological warfare. It started quietly, inside dim rooms filled with polished wooden desks. Gentlemen met secretly, crafting messages designed to manipulate public sentiment. They studied emotion and dissecting nature, searching predictable behavioral triggers. Propaganda became method, system, philosophy, and eventually Britain's greatest invisible empire. Long before newspapers dominated households, propaganda lived through royal proclamations. Kings shaped perception, with speeches projecting certainty during unstable political seasons. Words became weapons guiding loyalty across villages, untouched by government presence. Britain realized language allowed control over populations without military expenses. The printing press transformed influence into unstoppable force penetrating entire society. Books, pamphlets, and posters spread faster than authorities could regulate. Who controlled printing controlled truth, and truth dictated public obedience. Manipulation soon became structured strategy guiding Britain's imperial decision-making. As empire grew wider, propaganda grew deeper, subtler, and more necessary. Colonial subjects required narratives portraying Britain, a righteous global guardian. Writers crafted myths presenting conquest as benevolence, order, and civilized progress. Manipulation ensured resistance weakened under psychological weight of fabricated destiny. The East India Company perfected early corporate propaganda across distant territories. Reports softened brutality, replacing violence with language celebrating commerce and stability. Narratives prevented outrage within Britain, enabling empire to expand freely. Propaganda hid exploitation behind polished phrases describing opportunity and improvement. By the 1800s, newspapers became Britain's most powerful opinion-shaping instruments. Editors framed stories to guide public emotion during national political debates. Governments courted journalists, ensuring favorable coverage for sensitive decisions. Manipulation no longer occasional, it became deeply embedded cultural tradition. Victorian Britain romanticized empire through art, literature, and public exhibitions. Displays portrayed foreign cultures as exotic, dangerous, or childlike dependence. Such images justified expansion, suppressing empathy toward colonized populations entirely. Propaganda crafted worldview painting empire as natural evolutionary global outcome. Telegraph networks gave Britain global influence, faster than military mobilization. Messages reached colonies instantly, shaping interpretation before truth emerged. Speed provided advantage that allowed narrative control across entire empire. Britain weaponized communication before competitors understood psychological power. During the Boer War, propaganda reached industrial-level intensity within newspapers. Casualties downplayed, victories exaggerated, complexities removed to maintain support. Images and editorials presented conflict as moral necessity, defending British civilization. Manipulation ensured unity despite contradictions ordinary citizens never fully understood. The First World War institutionalized propaganda inside official British government machinery. The War Propaganda Bureau recruited writers, shaping national consciousness deliberately. Posters evoked fear, guilt, pride, and duty, reinforcing supportive wartime behavior. Every message engineered emotional consistency, binding nation into collective mission. Propaganda didn't only rally support, it dismantled enemy morale strategically. Leaflets encouraged doubt, depicting hopelessness within opposing civilian populations. Psychological pressure weakened unity far more effectively than conventional weaponry. Narrative warfare became indispensable battlefield where Britain excelled remarkably. Censorship worked alongside propaganda, protecting narrative uniformity during wartime crisis. Information filtered, delayed, altered, or erased, preventing societal emotional collapse. People saw curated reality, creating illusion of stability, despite immense suffering. Britain learned truth control meant behavior control on national scale. After the war, propaganda didn't disappear. It evolved into political communication. Democracy required persuasion, and persuasion became theatre of emotional influence. Campaigns prioritized symbolism, fear, and moral framing over policy clarity. The public unknowingly consumed narratives engineered for behavioral compliance. Radio deepened influence, entering homes with trusted authoritative voices nightly. Governments exploited intimacy, shaping thought through direct spoken messaging. Britain discovered voices could persuade more effectively than printed statements. Propaganda matured as psychological craft, blending emotion with structured repetition. As fascism spread, propaganda became battlefield, shaping ideological interpretation globally. Britain responded, crafting narratives, portraying democracy as civilization's moral heart. Stories instilled confidence, preparing society psychologically for impending conflict. Narrative preparation ensured resilience long before soldiers entered active battlefields. The Second World War expanded manipulation operations to unprecedented institutional scale. The Ministry of Information synchronized posters, films, broadcasts, and speeches. Propaganda encouraged sacrifice, rationing, vigilance, and collective wartime discipline. Emotional engineering became national survival mechanism, worthy of intense investment. Careless talk costs lives, warned citizens against revealing sensitive information accidentally. Fear guided behavior, turning ordinary people into vigilant psychological participants. Propaganda encouraged self-policing, sustaining secrecy vital to national survival. Britain mastered controlling populations through fear structured with patriotic rationality. Black propaganda emerged as darkest psychological weapon, targeting enemy civilization. Britain produced fake enemy broadcasts, undermining morale with fabricated narratives. Fear, suspicion, betrayal, and hopelessness spread among enemy ranks strategically. War shifted toward mines, where Britain held overwhelming structural superiority. After the war, Britain refused to dismantle manipulation systems entirely. These tools proved effective, stabilizing society during Reconstruction years. Narratives encouraged patience, unity, and belief in shared economic recovery. Propaganda ensured resilience during rationing, preventing unrest from rising. Then television revolutionized persuasion, adding images shaping emotion instantly. Camera angles, lighting, pacing, and sound designed subconscious interpretation precisely. Britain learned pictures could persuade faster than any carefully constructed speech. Visual propaganda became everyday experience, embedded within national domestic culture. Cold War era elevated British propaganda onto global strategic stage rapidly. Broadcasts targeted nations vulnerable to communist ideological expansion across continents. Britain positioned itself defender of truth, guiding millions through turmoil. Words became stabilizing force in world divided by ideological mistrust. The BBC World Service became Britain's soft power crown, trusted internationally. Its tone conveyed reliability, giving subtle ideological filtering beneath neutrality. Audiences accepted messages believing them objective despite strategic shaping. Britain influenced geopolitics through sound waves reaching distant, unstable regions. Psychological departments within intelligence agencies expanded research into persuasion. They studied conformity, obedience, fear response, and emotional vulnerability extensively. Findings transformed manipulation from technique into measurable behavioral science. Propaganda became precision instrument guiding societies without visible enforcement. By late 20th century, propaganda merged with entertainment and commercial persuasion. People consumed narratives unknowingly, believing choices entirely self-created. Britain mastered engineering opinions through environments rather than explicit messaging. The battlefield became culture itself, where influence operated invisibly. Digital technology amplified persuasion beyond anything earlier generations ever imagined. Britain adapted rapidly, upgrading propaganda to algorithmic psychological influence systems. Social media allowed micro-targeted emotional manipulation at unprecedented global scale. Narratives adjusted individually, tailored precisely to each viewer's psychological profile. Information warfare units monitored online discourse, identifying emerging societal vulnerabilities. They inserted narratives engineered to strengthen British diplomatic and economic aims. Digital influence spread silently, shaping belief systems without conscious user awareness. Persuasion transcended broadcasting, becoming personalized psychological conditioning mechanism. British think tanks refined global messaging disguised as intellectual research output. Reports framed geopolitical directions as logical outcomes benefiting international stability. Media repeated conclusions unquestioningly, amplifying narratives crafted for influence. Propaganda hid behind academic language, giving illusion of rational neutrality. Corporations collaborated, using emotional engineering to influence consumer behavior globally. Advertising borrowed state propaganda techniques, manipulating desire with remarkable precision. Culture became economic battlefield saturated with psychological manipulation strategies. Britain shaped societies through markets as effectively as through politics. During international crises, Britain shaped narratives guiding global interpretation deliberately. Statements framed conflicts highlighting moral clarity, favoring British diplomatic objectives. Journalists echoed framing, constructing consensus appearing organic and spontaneous. Public believed perspectives unbiased despite deep structural narrative coordination. Britain influenced enemy states by amplifying internal divisions through strategic messaging. Propaganda highlighted corruption, incompetence, and political instability, weakening unity. Internal conflict redirected energy away from challenging British geopolitical interests. Narrative disruption became weapon destabilizing adversaries without physical confrontation. Diaspora communities became channels spreading influence into politically sensitive regions. Britain broadcast targeted messaging shaping identity, loyalty, and political alignment. Communities trusted British institutions more than unstable domestic power structures. Thus, propaganda shaped foreign politics through culturally embedded international networks. Financial forecasting became indirect propaganda, influencing global economic decisions. Predictions warned nations against actions harming British strategic economic positioning. Businesses and governments reacted fearfully, adjusting policy to narrative expectations. Propaganda guided markets through psychological conditioning disguised as expert commentary. Hollywood amplified Britain's soft power subtly through shared cultural storytelling. Heroes reflected Western values, reinforcing perception of allied moral superiority. Foreign populations absorbed narratives, normalizing Britain's global political alignment. Films shaped worldview more effectively than traditional diplomatic communication efforts. In the digital era, truth fragmented into competing personalized realities instantly. Britain filled informational voids, supplying narratives, giving structure to chaos. People sought stability, accepting curated stories from trusted British platforms. Propaganda thrived because fear demanded guidance delivered through calm authority. Artificial intelligence revolutionized forecasting within psychological influence operations worldwide. Algorithms predicted emotional responses, enabling refined narrative deployment strategies. Propaganda became an adaptive system, evolving instantly to shifting public sentiment. Influence turned from art into automated behavioral science under algorithmic control. Britain weaponized credibility by appearing defender of transparency and democratic freedom. This moral framing disarmed critics who perceived propaganda as trustworthy clarity. Thus, Britain expanded reach under illusion of protecting global truth. Influence worked best when disguised as ethical responsibility for civilization. Narratives infiltrated international institutions, shaping debates on trade and security. Speeches used precise language guiding global reaction before final decisions materialized. Britain influenced alliances by controlling interpretive frameworks surrounding geopolitical events. Propaganda determined meaning before facts reached global public consciousness. Foreign governments monitored British messaging, interpreting subtle shifts as diplomatic signals. They altered policies reacting to narratives crafted with strategic psychological calculation. Persuasion replaced negotiation, guiding governments through indirect psychological leverage. Britain spoke softly, but its narratives moved entire political landscapes. As information became weapon, Britain mastered battlefield unseen by everyday populations. War no longer required borders, soldiers, or visible destruction to succeed. Modern power ruled perceptions, shaped identity, influenced interpretation, controlled narrative. Britain perfected quiet dominance through psychological manipulation, guiding global governance. And today, in world drowning beneath infinite content and engineered emotion, propaganda remains Britain's most enduring instrument of geopolitical survival. Empires fade, armies shrink, borders shift, but narratives outlast everything. Britain still shapes minds long after losing the territories once conquered. If this story revealed how power hides inside every message, remember, influence begins long before truth ever reaches you. Subscribe for more untold histories behind civilization's silent manipulators, because the next narrative shaping your future is already being written.